Every human being finds war to be strange. However, there are a lot of civil wars happening today. Hello, this is KYC News, and the topic of the day is civil war. The 5 deadliest civil wars in history. Some of the most horrific confrontations in history have been those between nations. Civil wars can take many different forms. Sometimes, like during the American Civil War, a section of the populace just wants to leave and form a new nation. Other times, a new political movement wants to take over the government. In other cases, outside parties might try to divide the state in order to make it weaker or obtain access to its resources. Civil wars, when a single people were divided into several states and then one party tried to impose a single state solution, were very prevalent during the Cold War. Threats to a country's unity or partition strike at the heart of nationalist sentiment. Because of this, civil conflicts can be very harsh, especially to civilians attempting to flee the conflict. Here are the top 5 bloodiest civil wars in history. Asian Civil War. Between 1927 and 1950, Chinese nationalists and a revolutionary communist movement engaged in combat in the Chinese Civil War. In the end, the communists led by Mao Zedong created the People's Republic of China on the mainland, while the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek fled to the island of Taiwan to continue as the Republic of China. More than 8 million people died as a result of the war, the majority of whom were civilians who died through disease, malnutrition, and retaliation carried out by one side in regions considered to be favorable to the other. Insurgency by Chinese communist troops against the Chinese nationalist government dominated the first stage of the Civil War in China. However, the communists performed poorly and were only able to escape total annihilation by making the fictitious Long March to the relative safety of Shaanxi province. After World War II, the Soviet forces in Manchuria and Korea handed over surplus Soviet armaments as well as seized Japanese equipment to Mao's armies, giving the communist forces their big breakthrough. This significantly increased the communist forces' firepower and overall effectiveness. Chinese nationalists were eventually driven from the mainland when the tide changed.
War in Korea. Although the Korean War is mostly recognized in the United States as a military intervention on behalf of the South Korean government, it may also be broadly characterized as an ongoing civil war. Korea had been split into 2 states at the close of World War II, the South, supported by the United States and the UN, and the North, supported by China and the Soviet Union. On June 25, 1950, with the goal of unifying the nation, Kim Il-sung's Korean People's Army crossed the international boundary. American, Chinese, and Soviet forces all intervened as a result of the war. By contemporary standards, it was also unusually lethal, with many million people dying on the Korean peninsula, an area the size of Utah. The Republic of Korea estimates that it lost 70,000 soldiers in the conflict, the United States 46,000, and North Korea and China together lost 1 million soldiers, 600,000 in combat and 400,000 from disease and illness. The war claimed the lives of little under 1 million South Koreans, or 5% of the total population. An estimated 1.5 million people were murdered in North Korea as a result of intensive aerial bombing by international troops, representing 10 to 15% of the population. Such losses are greater than those incurred by the Soviet Union during World War II. Civil War in Vietnam. Vietnam War, Second Indochina War. An attempt at reunion seemed unavoidable when Vietnam was split into 2 countries in 1954, especially since one side was governed by the successful commander of a guerrilla army. Conditions were ideal for a civil war to break out between a restive South Vietnamese population and a corrupt government in North Vietnam, which was governed by Ho Chi Minh, the man who had driven France from his homeland. South Vietnam, the United States, and other allies fought the Viet Cong guerrillas and North Vietnamese regular troops up until 1968. North Vietnam carried on fighting the war until its victory in 1975 after the Tet Offensive in January 1968 destroyed the Viet Cong as a military force. Additionally, Laos and Cambodia were affected by the fighting and became unstable. There were 1.5 million military fatalities overall, including 300,000 South Vietnamese and up to 1.1 million North Vietnamese. 58,307 Americans, 5,099 South Vietnamese, and 1,000 Chinese soldiers also lost their lives in the conflict. If fighting in neighboring Cambodia and Laos is included, the number of civilian deaths during the Vietnam Civil War could reach 2.5 million. Conflict in Congo. The biggest interstate war in African history has been said about the Congo Civil War. Ironically, the conflict actually started as Rwanda tried to control rebel groups coming from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, then known as Zaire, fighting for both territorial integrity and control of the nation's estimated $24 trillion in natural resources. The conflict eventually involved 9 countries and 20 armed organizations. The Congo Civil War, one of the worst conflicts of the past 100 years, killed 5.4 million people over the course of 5 years. As a result, there are close to 3,000 fatalities every day, a startling number given the absence of conventional, decisive warfare in general. The majority of individuals died in the Congo Civil War were civilians, as is true of most civil conflicts, especially wars in Africa, and were slain by malnutrition, disease, and atrocities committed by armed parties, including children. Niger Delta conflict. On July 6, 1967, the 4-year Nigerian Civil War began, and it continued until 1970. Due to their subordinate position in Nigerian society and military government rule, the Igbo people broke away and founded the sovereign state of Biafra. The majority of the world's nations backed Nigeria, and with their assistance, the military government was able to retake oil-producing regions and conquer Port Harcourt, Biafra's port of entry to the outside world. Only 30,000 Biafrans were actually murdered throughout the battle. Around 2 million others perished from malnutrition and disease while isolated and destitute due to a lack of oil revenue. Biafra was compelled to submit on January 11, 1970, and was then reincorporated into Nigeria. If our material was enjoyable to you, kindly click the like button. Many thanks.